So this is in keeping then with the rest of Hume's empirical philosophy, where it's a matter of learned trial and error as opposed to a priori principles dropped on us to which we're supposed to conform. So the idea then is that individuals can start out with their own subjective preferences, but through this process of trial and error, learn that through cooperation and respect for each other's stuff, they will be better off.
Yes.
Okay. So at least we have gotten past the bootstrapping, right, initial moment. We've got some principles here. But as you mentioned in your talk, at this point, it's still based on self-interest in a narrow sense. And there's no reason why people won't defect, say, or just see the mutual back-scratching and mutual respect as something that's short-term and not necessarily to be extended to all other members of society and so on. So how do we get from these initially emergent agreements among individuals to where Hume if it wants to end up, which is to say social-wide, or kind of all of society, agreed upon principles that are firm and binding? What do we need to add?
Yeah, and this is a problem too. I mean, historically it occurs in Plato, and we find it in Hobbes as well, where you start out with this methodological individualism.
Right.
It's run by self-interest. Self-interest is, oh, I recognize it's in my self-interest to leave you alone. You recognize it's in your self-interest to leave me alone. And everything's all well and good until you say, well, wait a second, what about those cases where you realize it's not in your self-interest anymore? Maybe I'm way more powerful than you. Maybe you've turned your back and I can get something and you don't know it. If all it is self-interest, it would seem that, well, then that's what you should do. Take the ring and go kill the king and make the queen your wife. You'd be a fool to do otherwise, and there's certainly no moral rule stopping you. The point is that Hume takes methodological individualism up to conventions, but then after that, conventions are really what's running the game, and that is that Hume thinks, and I think Hume does think just as Aristotle does, we're social creatures. We're not these solipsistic creatures, right? We are social creatures, and these conventions, once they're running, once we're respecting each other's property, once we're trading, once we're recognizing that these mutual strategies are beneficial, we're interacting as the social creatures we're meant to be. This has an effect on our psychic makeup, just like cause and effect does, where the repetitive, constant conjunction of continuous objects, whether they're pool balls or whatever, imprints upon our mind that, well, that's going to happen again. We develop the same expectations. No, it's not a rational calculation. We develop the same expectations with regards to other people. And also then we begin to put this into language. And once we start having concepts of mine and thine, if you will, and language that says that certain actions, and this is actually his terminology in the inquiry, that certain actions are odious, that these then now apply in a general fashion. It goes beyond me. Odious means to anybody. And that's where we really then go beyond. It's now no longer about whether it's in my self-interest or not, it's whether the activity is odious. And if I can add one more thing here, there's a very interesting article by John Rawls called Two Concepts of Rules. And really what Hume, I think, is arguing is how summary rules, which are conventions, they're rules of thumb that have a general utility, become practice rules. And a practice rule is something that actually defines a practice, that one is not free to violate based solely on self-interest. So the rules of baseball or has certain rules that are practice rules, that I don't care how much it's in my self-interest, I'm not allowed to go to first base unless I do certain things to earn getting to first base.
Okay. So you mentioned historically a connection from David Hume in the 18th century to 20th century figures, John Rawls and Axelrod, both of whom you mentioned. Are there other important figures in the transition from Hume's generation to ours who are carrying on the Humean legacy and Humean approach whom we might also look to?
Well, Smith definitely does.
This is Adam Smith?
Yeah, Adam Smith I think he takes Hume's analysis of how conventions are formed and then applies it to economics. Because Smith's systems works once you have property, trade, and contract in place. And Smith's natural liberty, that is allowing people to pursue their self-interest for their own ends, within those constraints mirrors Hume's agents pursuing their own ends in making up property. Of course, that's not recent. That's 1776. More recently, like I said, Robert Sugden, Brian Skirms. You also, I mean, Hayek draws on Hume, greatly draws on Hume. And those are the ones that I can think of right now that have a huge influence in Hume.
All right, so Hume's influence is alive and well in the late 20th, early 21st century.
It is, and I think it's getting better, but there was a time, and this stems from Rawls. Rawls was very Kantian, and admittedly so. And you look at a lot of Rawls's students that graduate from him, that get key positions at key universities. So if you really look at the decades, probably from the mid-'80s up and through pretty much even now, academia, I mean, there's an emphasis, Kant has it right. Hume opened Kant's eyes, but Kant is the one that had it right. Hume didn't. I think that's changing slightly. There certainly have been big names that have championed Hume, but you'd be hard-pressed to go to the literature now and find a Humean theory of justice. You could find Kantian, Rawlsian, utilitarian, Hobbesian, all defended as correct systems of justice, but it's really hard to find one that defends a Humean theory.
All right. Well, thank you for your lecture today.
Well, thank you. I had fun.
Good.